Hey everyone, we are back here with a new chapter. We'll talk about climate classification. So, what needs for climate? Let's check our lecture. So, climate classification, we're going to discuss pretty much what characteristics of climate you expect, difference between weather and climate, understand empirical and generic climate classification, define climate, understand the principal components, and so on. So let's talk first, what is climate? So when we talk about temperature outside, is raining, is sunny, is 50 degrees, is 70 degrees, is snowing, we'll talk about weather. So any picture you have outside at one single moment, you be weather. Well, when you talk a long term, we talk about climate. So what's the average for temperature average? What the precipitation average? How's gonna be the next season? Below, above average? So that's climate, long-term weather information. And climatology is the science who study climate. So all components such as solar radiation, atmospheric circulations, we'll talk about air masses and other controlling factors. So long time ago, the Greeks come with some ideas and separate our planet or classify our planet in three climate zones. The first one is the torrid zone. If you look at that image, you're going to see very similar are the tropical region because it's between Tropic of the Cancer and Tropic of the Capricorn. So that area where the temperature is warm year-round. There's no much change. There's no seasonality. Well, a little further north and south of the Tropic of Capricorn and Tropic of the Cancer is the temperate zone. That area represents what? Where the changes season, we have a warmer temperature in the winter, lower temperature in the summer. So that's the temperate zone. And finally, the very cold year-round, the Greeks call a frigid zone. Very simple classification where they use this different type of climate. So another elements we're going to review type of the climate, classify climate, what type of climates you talk about. We mentioned tropical climates, temperate climates. So what make a climate? Continental, polar, all characteristics you have. So dry climates, what characteristics you have. So what's the elements of climate we'll talk about? So you try to understand solar radiation, topography, air masses, ocean currents, pressure systems, all them are part of the elements of climate, how they change during the year and long terms. All right? So, solar radiation. So how the sun impact our system. So the solar it is considered the most important climate factor because what happened controls the planet temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, and other factors are imagined. So you study how this uneven distribution of solar radiation that's impact and create phenomena like the hurricanes or tornadoes or mid-latitude cyclones. So climate is characteristic for a specific region, as you expect then. So to understand the climate, you have to understand air mass. So what is air mass? Air mass is this large area of air was built or being born in the region have similar characteristics. But what characteristics you talk about? You talk about temperature and humidity. So where in Earth you can find area of a homogeneous surface where you can create air mass. Think about large oceans, large continents. Both of them are favorable to produce air masses. So remember the pressure system we discussed in this chapter 6, semi-high permanent pressure, what happened. So also you have the ITCZ and how the ITCZ affects precipitation. So another elements of climate would be ocean currents. So think about the Gulf Stream. What characteristic you have of the Gulf Stream? This warm and moist air transport energy and modulate temperature and climate in the Europe regions. Topography, as we're going to study in chapter 8, is more uplifting, how precipitation occur in some areas where you have a mountains, where it's dry on the other side. So a very important factor is the topography. So how you classify, that's another interesting fact. The classification is the idea to organize things. Imagine in class we have boys and girls, so you can have a very simple classification, 2 elements. But you can also classify you by height. You can classify you by your eyes color, hair. So more classes you include, narrow down. So if you have too many classes, what happens? Each of you guys is going to be one class, and that's not the case. So in climate, they come up with 2 different processes. One called genetic, that means what start the climate classification, what generate the climate. So what causes the climate? For example, if you look here in Georgia, you talk about air masses, possible. Hurricanes, very rare. Cold fronts is another element you have in this area. So when you're looking for what causes, so you can compare regions like a genetic or DNA model. So what characteristics you have. Sometimes you can put things together. So like regions where they have similarity, so which air masses produce the weather in that area, or that should be a genetic. You don't care if the temperature average is 70, 30, or how much precipitation you have. So the other way you can classify, you can be the empirical classification. So the empirical classification, we don't care which produce the rain, or is hot or in summer, or it's cold in winter, but the average. So for example, in Atlanta, which is the annual average temperature, which is the annual average precipitation. So that's the empirical one. When we're looking in terms of numbers, but not what produce. The genetic one is what causes the climate or the weather, but not the numbers. What's the average? So that's 2 principal models you can have. In this map, you can see the worldwide average precipitation. Look at those areas, as you can see here, in part of South America. What tell us? What characteristics you have in this area? High precipitation, the same thing here in Africa and also in the Indonesian areas. So pretty much you have the ITCZ, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, producing all this heavy precipitation and unique characteristic. But look at other areas. Let me see here. Another areas you can see very, very dry. So why you have this area extremely dry? Because you have pretty much high pressure system, very dry in that regions. So most of the planet have a very low precipitation. That's one characteristic you have between them. So in this case, we're going to define 6 basic climate categories: tropical, mesothermal, microthermal, polar, alpine, and finally dry. So the dry is pretty much created by lower precipitation. So in this picture, in this map, you can see the world climate classification developed by Köppen. So look around the SH, the very dry areas. So where to see some unique type of a climate you don't see around the world. So happen in one region but doesn't happen another one. So how they combine, they classify, is they using temperature and precipitation, where they shows how much similar values occur around the world. And that was developed by Köppen. Köppen come up with the idea observing plants. So if you have a specific type of plant developing this region, think about why happen in other regions in the world. Because they have a similar climate, precipitation, temperature. Think about. So that's how Köppen come up with this classification, where looking for similar plants what characteristic they have. So the first one is the tropical one. So where you can find the tropical? Between Tropical Cancer and Tropical Capricorn. That's where you can find what characteristic you have. Think about temperature-wise, not much change. So you have almost a flat line in terms of temperature, around 80 degrees. So other characteristic you have, precipitation. Well, temperature is not different, so all tropical regions gonna have warm temperature. But precipitation will be a factor because remember, the ITCZ moves, the ITCZ changes. So areas where we have more ITCZ influence is gonna be a fact. Different than one you be outside this area. So when you look then, what you can see here is exactly long day, you have warm ocean currents. What else you can have there is going to tell you what's going on. So the ITCZ is a main factor by this area. So look where you can find the tropical climate. Most of Brazil, Africa, and go to the Indonesia as well. So what characteristics you have? You have the tropical rainforest, the tropical monsoon, and the tropical savanna. So what they have in common is the temperature, because it is in a tropical region. Not much changes, as you note. So what else you have? Precipitation will be the factor. So where is the ITCZ effect, more or less, is going to change. So you have no dry season. You have a well-defined dry and wet season, or you have a very long dry season, but also you have rain season, but not much. So if you look around in this map, you're going to see details where the tropical rainforest is surrounded by tropical savanna. The same thing you talk about to the tropical monsoon. The tropical monsoon, the characteristic is a little different. So let's look each one of those. So the tropical climate, tropical rainforest, rain all year round, hot and wet. Tropical monsoon, 6 to 12 months of rain. Tropical savanna, less than 6 months of rain. So rain is the factor in this area. So if you look at the tropical rainforest, they call climograph. Let's look at this graphic. This graphic shows us something you put together, as you can see here, monthly average temperature and precipitation. So the precipitation is those blue bars and the temperature is the line. So look what happened. You see a very flat line in temperature, precipitation year round, and that region is north of Brazil, as you can see there. Look at the map, look at the pictures, very dense forest because rains a lot year round. So that's allowed the trees grows fast. So what another characteristic you have? Look in terms of latitude. We'll talk about some elements UV latitude. We'll talk about high temperature, high precipitation. Look at more details here. Where you can find temperature wise, you talk about annual temperature 26 degrees. What else you can have? Precipitation 114 inches, elevation not much, elevation not factor. Look at beautiful forest. That's the characteristic you have for the tropical rainforest. The next one is the tropical monsoon. So produce a lot of rain, extreme rain. So let's see some characteristics you have in the tropical monsoon. You'll be precipitation. So the monsoon is characterized by the ITCZ move in and move out. So when the ITCZ, as you can see here, gets closer, look what happened. Look at the precipitation. You have very little precipitation in this area in this first month of the year. Then suddenly, like all faucets open at the same time and start pouring. So you go from ½ inch, for example, in April, to more than 12 inches in the next month, and then so far, so on. Very large precipitation. So where you can find this area here in Myanmar, look at the forest. It's not dense like the tropical forest because look what happened. Very dry season, and this dry season is because you have subtropical high. So ITCZ, subtropical high, ITCZ, subtropical high. That's the characteristic you have by the tropical monsoon. The next one will be the tropical savanna. So look at the characteristic you have in the tropical savanna. More details in terms of precipitation. Now you have a well-defined dry season, but look what happened. You still have ITCZ signature, and pretty much you have the subtropical high. Because you have much less precipitation, look at the density. You don't have the same characteristic as the tropical monsoon, or you talk about the tropical rainforest. This area is close to Tanzania. That's area you have a very interesting type of climate. So that's our three tropical classification: tropical rainforest, tropical savanna, and tropical monsoon. So that's exactly in the tropical region. So outside the tropical region, you start to see more changes in temperature and elements you have. So the next one will be the dry climates. The dry climates doesn't fall exactly in all classifications. Why? Because it's based in precipitation or lack of precipitation. So remember, the tropical climates, temperature is constant because it doesn't change. Now the dry climates is the lower precipitation. Temperature might change. So where you can find dry climates? You can find between 15 to 30 degrees north latitudes. So some areas subtropical high because you have subsidence. Some windward side of the mountains where you have a rain shadow. So pretty much the orographic lifting. So the subtropical or the dry climates has been classified in some of those. You have dry climates in deserts and steppes, and what characteristic there? Both are very low precipitation. That's the main characteristic to have them. So the characteristic, you can have subtropical, tropical, subtropical, dry for hot desert climate. You have tropical, subtropical, hot steppes, and you see the deserts are surrounded by those steppes. So steppes pretty much is a transitional zone between extreme dry and more wet. So every desert is surrounded by those steppes. Let's see more details here where you can find them in the world. So they are everywhere. So the dry, arid, and semi-arid type of climate, they pretty much cover more area than any other type of climate. So look at the characteristics you have. Of course, the Sahara. So also you can find interesting because factors such as topography. Why? The air is forced to rise one side, sink another one, so you have very dry. Another characteristic, cold ocean currents. So the ocean currents not allow the air evaporates and produce precipitation, making the air very dry. Remember where you can find? West Coast. All countries you have the West Coast, you have a cold current. If the cold current is so strong, what's going to happen? Affecting the climate. Other characteristics you have subtropical high, permanent air sinking, produce also dry region, as you know. So what characteristics you have? Dry, subsidence air, subtropical high, shifting the system also produce semi-arid steppes, location with rain shadows, location where western continents you have this cold and very stable warm ocean currents, and of course when you're far away from the ocean or the water source also makes much drier. So let's see the first one, tropical, subtropical, hot desert. Look at the characteristics you have in terms of precipitation. Not much. look what you have, very little precipitation. We'll talk about in terms of 3.2 inches. What you see, dry, very dry, very little precipitation you have in this area. So another one you have is the mid-latitude cold desert. So now you talk about area in the middle of the continent. Look at the characteristic you have in terms of precipitation. A little more precipitation, you see the temperature how change, but not much cold. So let's see the numbers you have. In terms of average annual temperature, 57.2 degrees Fahrenheit, annual precipitation 8.1 inches. You see a very little vegetation. Rains, but not much during the year round. So finally you have a tropical, subtropical, hot steppe type of climate. You have a little more precipitation, so ends up you have some kind of a better vegetation, quite similar to its tropical steppes. But why is not? Because look at the latitude. Is not tropical, is outside the tropical region, so that's why make not tropical. That's why, but very similar in terms of precipitation. But of course, the tropical steppe has a little more precipitation. Finally, you have the mid-latitude cold steppe. Look how the temperature change year-round. Look at the minimum temperature, very cold in the winter, as you can see in those maps. Precipitation uniform distributed, but look what happened. Not much precipitation, only 10.4 inches, very little precipitation. But you see a beautiful area. You can, in this area in the Kazakhstan, nice grass, but no trees because the temperature is very low and not allow trees to grow. And finally is gonna be the mid-latitude cold steppe. So what characteristic you have? So since it's mid-latitude, where we can find? In the mid-latitude. Much drier, as you can see, 10.8 inches, very cold temperature, very below freezing point several months a year, but you have a quite wet season and extremely dry season in that area.